The beginnings of Polish literature. Since the arrival of Christianity and the subsequent access to Western European civilization, Poles developed a significant literary production in Latin. Conspicuous authors of the Middle Ages are among others Gallus Anonymous, Wincenty Kadlubek and Jan Długosz, an author of the monumental work on the history of Poland. With the arrival of the Renaissance, Poles came under the influence of the artistic patterns of the humanistic style, actively participating in the European issues of that time with their Latin works. Polish literature is the literary tradition of Poland. Most Polish literature has been written in the Polish language, though other languages used in Poland over the centuries have also contributed to Polish literary traditions, including Yiddish, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, German and Esperanto. Middle Ages. Almost nothing remains of Polish literature prior to the country's Christianization in 966. Poland's pagan inhabitants certainly possessed an oral literature extending to Slavic songs, legends and beliefs, but early Christian writers did not deem it worthy of mention in the obligatory Latin, and so it has perished. The first recorded sentence in the Polish language reads, "De otia pobrusa, a ti posuy, let me grind, and you take a rest," a paraphrase of the Latin sign, uti goetiam milam. The work in which this phrase appeared reflects the culture of early Poland. Most early texts in Polish vernacular were influenced heavily by the Latin sacred literature. They include Bogorodzica, Mother of God. Bogorodzica served as a national anthem. Renaissance. With the advent of the Renaissance, the Polish language was finally accepted on an equal footing with Latin. Polish culture and art flourished under Jagiellonian rule, and many foreign poets and writers settled in Poland, bringing with them new literary trends. A Polish writer who used Latin as his principal vehicle of expression was Klemens Janicki, who became one of the most notable Latin poets of his time and was laureled by the Pope. Other writers such as Mikołaj Rej and Jan Kochanowski laid the foundations for the Polish literary language and modern Polish grammar. The first book written entirely in the Polish language appeared in this period. Jan Kochanowski, 1530. The 22nd of August 1584, was a Polish Renaissance poet who established poetic patterns that would become integral to the Polish literary language. Mikołaj Rej, February 4, 1505 between September 8 and October 5, 1569, was a Polish poet and prose writer of the emerging Renaissance in Poland as it succeeded their Middle Ages, as well as a politician and musician. He was the first Polish author to write exclusively in the Polish language, and is considered, with Bernat of Lublin and Jan Kochanowski, to be one of the founders of Polish literary language and literature. Baroque. The Polish Baroque lasted from the early 17th to the mid-18th century. As with Baroque style elsewhere in Europe, Poland's Baroque emphasized the richness and triumphant power of contemporary art forms, in contrast to the previous Renaissance style, which sought to depict the beauty and harmony of nature. Baroque artists strove to create their own vision of the world. The literature in the period of Polish Baroque was significantly influenced by the great popularization of Jesuit high schools, which offered education based on Latin classics as part of a preparation for a political career. The studies of poetry required the practical knowledge of writing both Latin and Polish poems, which radically increased the number of poets. Enlightenment. The period of Polish Enlightenment began in the 1730s-40s and peaked in the second half of the 18th century during the reign of Poland's last king, Stanislaw August Poniatowski. It went into sharp decline with the third and final partition of Poland, 1795, followed by political, cultural and economic destruction of the country, and leading to the great emigration of Polish elites. The Enlightenment ended around 1822, and was replaced by Polish Romanticism at home and abroad. One of the leading Polish Enlightenment poets was Ignacy Krasicki, 1735–1801, known locally as the Prince of Poets. Author of the first Polish novel called Mikołaj do Zwycięskiego Przypadki. Another prominent writer of the period was Jan Potocki, 1761–1815. Romanticism. Polish Romanticism, unlike Romanticism elsewhere in Europe, was largely a movement for independence against the foreign occupation, and expressed the ideals and the traditional way of life of the Polish people. The period of Romanticism in Poland ended with the Tsarist suppression of the January 1863 uprising, marked by public executions by the Russians and deportations to Siberia. The literature of Polish Romanticism falls into two distinct periods, both defined by insurgencies, the first around 1820–1830, ending with the November Uprising of 1830, and the second between 1830–1864, giving birth to Polish positivism. In the first period, Polish Romantics were heavily influenced by other European Romantics. Their art featured emotionalism and imagination, folklore, country life, as well as the propagation of the ideals of independence. The most famous writers of the period were Adam Mickiewicz, Surin Gościński, Thomas Zahn and Maurycy Mochnacki. In the second period, after the January Uprising, many Polish Romantics worked abroad, often banished from the Polish soil by the occupying power. Their work became dominated by the ideals of freedom and the struggle for regaining the country's lost sovereignty. The most notable poet among the leading bards of Romanticism, so recognized in both periods, was Adam Mickiewicz. Other two national poets were Julius Słowaczki and Zygmunt Krasinski.
Prześliczki siedzą, jak anioł dzieweczki,
positivism. In the aftermath of the failed January uprising against the Russian occupation, the new period of Polish positivism began to advocate skepticism and the exercise of reason. Questions addressed by the positivist writers revolved around the so-called organic work, which included the establishment of equal rights for all members of society, the assimilation of Poland's Jewish minority, and the defense of the Polish population in the German-ruled part of Poland against Kulturkampfen, their violent displacement. The writers were poised to educate the public about constructive patriotism, which would enable Polish society to function as a fully integrated social organism, regardless of external circumstances. The period lasted until the turn of the 20th century and the advent of the Young Poland movement. At the turn of the century, Polish literature has presented us with the vicissitudes of life, difficulties and struggles of countless heroes. Heroes so different from each other and yet so differently trying to realize what they regarded as the paramount in his life. We read the story of fictional character created just for the need of a literary work, but also authentic people living in the past, or even in this present time. Being as we are human beings of flesh and blood, almost every character, his actions would achieve something to prove that he is able to make something great. The driving force behind these actions were different aspects of human life: love, faith, fight the good, but also a desire for revenge, exploitation and unbridled lust for power.